In October 1962, an elderly man named Arthur Pendleton carefully locked the massive oak door of a small government office in the suburbs of Washington behind him. He had spent 42 years as a senior cryptanalyst at the United States National Security Agency, responsible for decrypting the most complex diplomatic communications channels. That very day, he officially retired with a well-earned government pension and immediately left for a tiny, secluded house in the forests of Montana. He gave not a single phone comment to the persistent reporters from major capital newspapers who tried to learn the details of his work. He left behind absolutely no public memoirs, autobiographies, or entries in closed professional journals for analysts. He simply wanted to disappear forever into the silent American backcountry, taking with him all the secrets of a bygone Cold War era. But 3 months earlier, something happened that made the White House and CIA leadership rush to declare him a senile old man. To everyone's surprise, Pendleton appeared at a closed annual dinner of the Association of Military Intelligence Veterans at the Pentagon. Someone in the audience asked him a completely standard, routine question about methods of intercepting Soviet-coded messages during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Arthur slowly walked up to the central podium, stared for a long time into the faces of his former colleagues, and then said a sentence that brought silence over the room. "You are still obediently studying the official history textbooks they ordered printed at the Department of Defense. But for some reason, none of you has ever checked the old duty shift archive logs at the intercept station in Langley. None of you has asked exactly where the red folder with the code designation Project Azimuth, October 1962, disappeared to. It was the only authentic decryption of a secret telegram from Moscow, and I personally held it in my hands for 2 days, a unique document whose data the government of the United States never entered into any official report for Congress, because that telegram proved that the entire nuclear crisis was an artificial stage play meant to conceal another threat. After those words, Pendleton was politely but firmly asked to leave the podium, and the chairman immediately declared the evening closed. Official representatives of the intelligence community still call these statements the fantasy of a tired and lonely old man. But believe me, the ordinary geopolitical confrontation between two nuclear superpowers at the time has absolutely nothing to do with this. We are used to sincerely believing that presidents and generals carefully control every step they take and fight for the survival of humanity. But if you start digging in detail through the chronology of so-called technical cleanups in the National Archives, a frightening truth comes to the surface. The most important diplomatic documents of the 20th century do not vanish because of ordinary mistakes or the carelessness of young clerks. They are removed by direct order of people who very much do not want us to see how the global political machine is truly built. This is the story of what was actually recorded in the secret government telegram of 1962, and of the last living cryptographer who managed to break that code before the pages were hidden forever in concrete bunkers. If you, like me, want to get to the real mechanisms of power hidden behind triumphant historical myths, take a moment. Subscribe to the channel right now, and be sure to hit the like button under this video to support our investigations. It costs you nothing, but the algorithms will understand that deep historical investigations like this are truly needed by thinking people. Every like from you is one more lantern lit against the approaching darkness of corporate and government oblivion. If you're with me and ready to look behind the curtain of the Cuban Missile Crisis, light yours and let's go down into the intelligence archives. Arthur Pendleton spent more than half of his long and secretive life among those yellowed folders and dusty boxes. The official story, the one any university will tell you today, sounds as dramatic, cinematic, and polished as possible. In October 1962, the world stood on the brink of nuclear apocalypse because of Soviet missiles secretly placed by Nikita Khrushchev in Cuba. For decades, officials have repeated that President John Kennedy showed iron resolve, declared a blockade, and saved the planet from destruction. They show us clean reconnaissance photos from U-2 spy planes, recordings of UN Security Council sessions, and memoirs from participants in those events. But in his personal diaries, which his grandson miraculously preserved, Arthur Pendleton describes a completely different reality. Those records clearly prove that the official missile crisis was only the perfect smokescreen for concealing something far more important. The main archive repository of the National Security Agency on Trinity Place is not some ordinary warehouse of old papers. It is a multi-level underground bunker with armored doors, armed guards, and an extremely complex system of coded clearances. You physically cannot simply walk in, open the first box you see, and take intercepted coded messages for study. Every movement of every document is recorded in several control logs on different underground floors at once. And if a folder disappears from that perfect system, it means only one thing: it was erased deliberately. In September 1962, Pendleton was transferred to a special closed sector investigating anomalous signals from the Atlantic. He had been recognized as the best analyst in reconstructing damaged Soviet ciphers based on one-time pads and unique mathematical matrices which Soviet military engineers considered absolutely unbreakable. His main task in the new position was the complete review and cataloging of old radio intercepts arriving at American receiving stations from the direction of the Sargasso Sea and the Caribbean Basin, where strange activity of unidentified underwater objects, not responding to standard queries, was being recorded at the time. And then, on one rainy autumn day, while the entire country was watching in panic as Soviet cargo ships moved toward the shores of Havana, two massive boxes made of thick cardboard, tied with heavy twine and sealed with military intelligence wax stamps, landed on his desk. They had no standard state archive inventory numbers, but the personal ink stamp of CIA Director John McCone was clearly visible, along with a short handwritten note: Project Azimuth, urgent, decryption, October 1962. According to procedure, Arthur was required to check the document line by line, restore characters lost during radio interception, and prepare a final catalog card for the personal office of the President of the United States. What he discovered on the very first pages of that enormous body of intercepted data made him lock his office door from the inside with every bolt and completely forget about his lunch break, regulations, and personal safety rules. The telegram had been transmitted through a top-secret Soviet Navy supply channel, but its code resembled none of the known GRU or KGB ciphers that Pendleton had been cracking like nuts for 20 years. The cipher book was filled with strange alphanumeric groups, and it tracked not the coordinates of R-12 missile launch sites, but detailed reports about anomalous objects raised by Soviet divers from the bottom of the deep Cayman Trench. Beginning in the summer of 1962, under the cover of the large-scale military operation Anadir, which delivered troops and equipment to Cuba, Soviet research vessels were conducting deep-sea work in the strictest secrecy from American radar. The telegram described in full detail, with references to the ship logs of Project 641 diesel submarines, the coordinates of an underwater structure whose scale exceeded any known human construction. Judging by those records, Soviet specialists had discovered, at a depth of more than 5,000 meters, a colossal hemispherical object emitting powerful electromagnetic pulses that completely disabled the navigation systems of the American fleet in that sector of the Atlantic. But the most frightening and astonishing material was hidden on page 34 of the decrypted text, where closed agreements between Moscow and Washington, reached through unofficial channels by trusted personal envoys, were described in detail. The telegram proved that Nikita Khrushchev and John Kennedy knew perfectly well the true nature of the underwater threat and used the public deployment of nuclear missiles as a legal pretext to concentrate enormous naval forces at one point in the ocean. This entire public political performance, with mutual threats and the blockade of the island, was needed only to fully isolate the Sargasso Sea area from civilian vessels and begin a joint secret operation to block the signals coming from the depths of the Cayman Trench. Among the documents, Pendleton discovered original transcripts of direct negotiations between the Kremlin and the White House, marked highest priority, destroy after reading. Arthur's attention was especially drawn to a secret directive attached to the October 1962 Balance of Forces file, in which American and Soviet admirals coordinated joint deep-depth bombardments of the unidentified underwater object under the cover of training anti-submarine maneuvers. The command structures of two supposedly hostile armies consciously took an enormous risk of nuclear war in the eyes of the public, in order to hide from humanity the existence of an ancient autonomous structure on the ocean floor, whose activity had sharply increased after the beginning of atmospheric thermonuclear weapons tests. Arthur Pendleton, understanding the colossal historical danger of this discovery, worked for 2 days without sleep, carefully transferring the mathematical cipher keys and recording key phrases from the telegram in his personal work notebook. He placed the original document in a high-security safe, sealed it with wax, and went home, intending to personally hand the notebook to the head of the NSA's cryptographic department the next day. But he never got the chance. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, 4 internal security officers entered his office without knocking. Accompanied by counterintelligence agents, they silently presented Arthur with a directive signed personally by Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, granting them the right to immediately seize any materials related to Project Azimuth on grounds of national security. All of his personal drafts, work notebooks, and even carbon paper were packed into thick lead containers right in front of the shocked and powerless analyst, who understood that his work was being destroyed. The original telegram was removed from the safe, loaded into an armored case on a chain, and taken away in a special vehicle, while Arthur was strongly advised to forget the incident forever if he wanted to preserve his life and health. The head of security then stepped close to him, placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, and said quietly, "Pendleton, you are the best cryptographer in the agency, but you have broken the code that holds up the entire illusion of world order. The reality you decrypted in that Soviet telegram has officially never existed. It is simply false radio interference and enemy disinformation that we are writing off for disposal. If even one word from this report leaves these walls, your life will end in a windowless solitary cell, and your family will disappear forever from the lists of the living. Think about your loved ones." It was then, in the early 1960s, that the U.S. government, together with the Soviet leadership, developed a global program for the modernization and archiving of secret diplomatic channels, under the pretext of transferring old paper radio intercepts to new magnetic tapes and protecting secret codes from possible leaks. The total destruction of original documents from that era began. Thousands of authentic radio intercept logs, decrypted telegrams, and transcripts of closed meetings were secretly burned in Pentagon furnaces or dissolved in acid, while historians were handed a carefully edited version the Cuban Missile Crisis. Instead of the real story of two superpowers jointly fighting an unknown threat, we were handed a beautiful patriotic fairy tale about the victory of American diplomacy and President Kennedy's courage. But the original documents that could have been used to conduct an independent analysis and prove the global collusion of the military agencies of both countries against their own populations turned into gray ash. Arthur Pendleton remained silent for more than 30 years, dutifully performing his duties at the agency and avoiding the attention of internal security until he retired in 2006. But shortly before his death, on his secluded farm in Montana, he managed to give his son an old audio cassette on which he dictated in full detail the structure of Project Azimuth and the precise mathematical formulas of the Soviet cipher. He told his son, "The greatest lie of our century is that politicians control this world and fight each other over ideologies. Every war, every major international crisis, and every military blockade is planned by specific people to conceal secrets for which ordinary humanity is not yet ready. They erase the authentic telegrams, replace them with a false chronicle, and now they fully control our future while we believe fairy tales about missiles." Official representatives of the CIA and the U.S. Department of Defense still state that Project Azimuth and the secret telegram of 1962 are inventions of radical UFO researchers and conspiracy theorists. And Arthur Pendleton's personnel file in the archives of the National Security Agency is now completely locked and classified with no right of disclosure on grounds of national security. But the deep underground archives of the center at Fort Meade still stand in place, descending dozens of meters into the secured territory under the supervision of modern surveillance systems. To understand the true scale of this international concealment operation, one must look into the closed protocols of the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence for 1975, which disappeared right before the Church Committee hearings. Those papers mentioned a secret report by an independent analyst from the Arms Control Agency named Richard Helms, who was the first to discover strange inconsistencies. The real routes of Soviet submarines in October 1962 did not match the official maps of missile launch site locations in Cuba provided by the Pentagon. A huge fleet consisting of Soviet nuclear and diesel submarines was not heading toward the ports of Havana or Santiago de Cuba at all, but concentrating around an anomalous zone in the center of the Sargasso Sea. Helms recorded that Soviet ships coordinated their actions with American anti-submarine forces through floating relay stations installed on civilian vessels flying the flags of neutral European countries. When Richard tried to deliver copies of these operational maps to the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, his personal helicopter crashed over Virginia, and all his archives were confiscated. Government agencies carried out a brilliant operation of conceptual substitution, completely rewriting the history of the crisis and removing from it any mention that the nation's fleet had acted jointly with the Communists. This mechanism of automatic report falsification worked so flawlessly that no independent historian could detect the deception for half a century, because all radio communication logs were destroyed. The entire system of American cryptanalysis and radio interception was originally built under the strict control of a narrow group of analysts with a single purpose: to hide the real facts of encounters with ancient structures on the planet. The most advanced institutes of mathematics received enormous grants from defense foundations to develop new data encoding standards that legally allowed the military to conceal anomalous signals. As a result of this long-running conspiracy, we received a modern information world built on carefully filtered data and edited historical chronicles that raised no suspicion. Today, Terabytes of satellite images of the ocean and hydrologists' reports exist only as digital records on closed military servers, while the real information is completely hidden from independent science. When civilian oceanographers today try to request a complete relief map of the Cayman Trench, the government always responds with a firm refusal, citing national defense laws. They completely block any attempt at independent deep-sea scanning of this sector of the Atlantic, eliminating even the slightest possibility of civilian or international oversight of the anomalous zone. The military elite cleaned the archives so professionally that the modern generation of intelligence officers sincerely believes the Cuban Missile Crisis was an ordinary Cold War victory. They are convinced that nuclear parity protected the world, rather than serving as a convenient pretext for the largest joint defense operation by two superpowers in human history. And if today you try to find even one original physical radio intercept log or military spending cash ledger from the 1960s, you will inevitably run into a wall. They will politely show you terabytes of perfect digital video, or scan tables of diplomatic correspondence between Kennedy and Khrushchev to distract your attention. They will show you missile withdrawal charts and photographs of launch site dismantling, creating an illusion of absolute openness that raises no suspicion among ordinary citizens, but you will never be able to verify exactly what orders were received by the commander of Soviet submarine B-59, Captain Savitsky, on the cold night from October 27th to October 28th, 1962. Because the pages of the radio communication logs where that record was kept were irreversibly destroyed in the industrial shredders of the National Security Agency by direct order of men in plain clothes. They personally supervised the disposal of analog media in the underground basements of Fort Meade, erasing every trace of the Fleet Command's true orders. Arthur Pendleton understood perfectly well what kind of catastrophe for humanity this global replacement of real documents with digital simulacra on computer screens was leading to. In his final note, which he hid in a secret compartment under the wooden floor of his old house in Montana, he left a harsh warning for future generations. When the last cryptographer who saw the original Soviet codes on yellowed radio intercept tapes dies, the government lie will become an absolute and indisputable norm. A new generation of people will study digitized documents on their computer screens without understanding the real structure of the geopolitical system. They will argue about the Cuban Missile Crisis without realizing they are discussing sets and backdrops inside someone else's program, written for them in advance. The true history of humanity burned in the furnaces together with the logs of '62, and now we are only obedient little gears in someone else's machine. We serve a system that hides from us the true structure of the planet and our past, robbing us of our future and our independence of thought. And that gray ash of burned military archives is the highest price the nation obediently paid for its illusory calm and comfortable blindness. Official text will continue to claim that the world was saved thanks to Kennedy's resolve, and that nuclear weapons are the main deterrent. Millions of people will firmly believe that their security is reliably protected by the state and guaranteed by the power of the military, demanding no verification at all. But the stone silence of the Pentagon's underground vaults guards entirely different secrets, capable of destroying the familiar picture of world history in a single instant, and the original red folder of Project Azimuth still remains invisibly present in this story as the main reminder of a global deception. It is a reminder of exactly how all of humanity was deprived of its true right to know the truth about Earth and hidden threats. The traces of this global conspiracy cannot be completely erased because the laws of mathematics and logic do not know how to lie for the benefit of politicians who come and go, and our main task is to keep stubbornly searching for these hidden analog inconsistencies among the yellowed pages of old archive books. We must compare the balances of historical facts and ask uncomfortable questions of those who are used to ruling without limits, in total darkness. The conclusions from this story, as in all previous episodes of our channel, are yours alone to draw, based exclusively on logic. Thank you for digging down into this frightening, archival depth with me, and for not being afraid to look behind the curtain of the Cuban Missile Crisis and learn the secret of the 1962 telegram. Subscribe to our channel, be sure to leave your detailed comments under this video, and turn on the notification bell. Every like and comment from you is a direct, powerful strike against that monolithic wall of government oblivion that the intelligence services have built around us. Protect your thoughts from outside influence. Never trust perfect historical reports on the screens of your devices, and I'll see you soon in the next investigations.